The subcommittee will come to order. At the conclusion of opening statements yesterday, the chair called up H.R. 6 and the bill was open for amendment at any point. And keeping with our custom, we'll take up bipartisan amendments first. And so are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill? Seeing none, maybe there won't be any amendments at all. So are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman is recognized.
Yeah,
Yes. Report the amendment, please.
Amendment to H.R. 6 offered by Mr. Rush of Illinois.
And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we've heard a lot of rhetoric about the need to pass this bill in order to help Ukraine and our European allies deal with Russia. And while I believe that's an important consideration, I'm not convinced that this bill will get any natural gas to Europe anytime soon. The reality is that LNG from the United States is expected to go to Asia. In fact, currently there are no export facilities anywhere in the continental United States that are able to ship out LNG exports. The first export terminal would not begin initial operations until late 2015. And export capacity would not ramp up at other facilities with authorization to export LNG until at least 2017 or 2018. It is also worth pointing out that Ukraine does not currently have any facilities capable of importing or regasifying LNG. So when these exports ramp up several years from now, they will not be going directly to Ukraine. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, the U.S. export terminals most likely to be constructed generally have already entered into contractual commitments to supply entities in Asia, where natural gas prices are higher than those that are in Europe. Mr. Chairman, my amendment is simply about truth in advertising. The Bible says, know ye the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The amendment doesn't affect any of Mr. Gardner's provisions, but rather simply requires companies exporting LNG to publicly disclose where those exports are going. That way we'll be able to find out whether this is really going to help the Ukraine and our European allies, or if it's just going to lower the cost for manufacturers in China, in India, and in Korea. Mr. Chairman, my amendment leaves DOE with the flexibility to determine the timing of the public disclosure. Currently, when DOE issues a final approval, it establishes a number of conditions and the requirement to publicly disclose the destination or destinations of the LNG export that can be added as a condition. LNG export projects are multi-billion-dollar endeavors, and export terminals do not get built without the exporter entering into long-term contracts way up front. Anyone exporting LNG is going to know where it's going, and my amendment just makes sure that the American people know where it's going also. this amendment does not fix all the problems that are associated with this bill, but I think that it's a common sense improvement. We should be able to support this basic step to enhance transparency, so I urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support my amendment. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back, unless someone wants the time. I yield to the gentleman from California.
Just so I could get a clarification, no one's required to release commercial contracts or any confidential business information, just the destination of the LNG exports. Is that right? Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're not, by this amendment, by virtue of this amendment, you're not dictating or telling anybody what they have to do, only disclosing where the LNG is being exported. And the argument that I think you've made, which I think is a very strong one, is if we're really going to help Ukraine and people in Europe who are under the gun from the Russians by their using natural gas prices as a political lever, this will at least let us know if LNG is going to them or whether it's just going to Asia because it's just more profitable where they're paying more money. It's just simply giving information to Congress and the public. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I certainly support your amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to my colleague from Illinois, I would say that I want to work with you and this bipartisan initiative and legislation, and I'm prepared to accept the amendment, and I'll give you the reasons. I think working together on this, we can actually promote the interests of our allies and certainly improve geopolitical security around the world. Opposing this legislation is like hanging up on a 911 call from our friends and allies. But H.R. 6 in no way, shape, or form would affect the Secretary of Energy's authority under Section 3A of the Natural Gas Act to attach terms and conditions to the order that the Secretary finds necessary or appropriate to protect the public interest. In fact, Section 590.202B, as I have right here, of the regulations, DOE regulations, already requires public disclosure of transaction-specific information. Those items include the scope of the project, including the volumes of natural gas involved, the source and security of the natural gas supply, identification of all participants in the transaction, the terms of the transaction, the provisions of the export contract, including the price and the volume requirements, the lack of a national or regional need for the gas, and the potential environmental impacts. So H.R. 6 would not affect the Secretary's authority to continue to apply these kinds of conditions. Recent FTA and non-FTA applications have been granted with conditions that require the public disclosure of export destinations and contract details in semi-annual reports. So it's already in the regulations. This amendment reflects the regulations, and I'd be prepared to accept the amendment and continue to working in a bipartisan fashion to adopt this legislation.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yield, yes.
I certainly appreciate the gentleman's acceptance and willingness to work with me on this amendment on this bill. There are a few other major issues that I do have with the bill, and I'm not prepared to vote in favor of the bill right now, but I'm looking forward and eager to work with the gentleman so that maybe we can address not only this amendment, but some of the other issues that I might have regarding that. I want to thank the gentleman again.
Thank the gentleman again. I think it just shows the good faith efforts on this side to try to make sure that we work on a legislation that reflects the bipartisan intent of legislation. I would talk just briefly about how important it is that we recognize the call that we have received from our allies, Ukraine, Hungary, other nations who have talked about the need for additional security alternatives to energy resources. LNG exports from the United States could fill that need and, in fact, creating a great deal of jobs here at home. I think the comments have been made, too, about this legislation, and I believe the gentleman from Illinois made this comment about the bill, talking about the length of time it would take to actually construct an LNG export facility and the time it would take for a trade partner to receive that LNG. But we've heard testimony, we've had letters, we've received word through many of our diplomatic friends in the diplomatic community, that approving this legislation today would send a strong market signal today that we have help on the way, that they would not be reliant upon aggressive nations like Russia for their energy, that they would send a market signal knowing that our energy superpower capabilities is there for our allies. And that's the important part of this legislation, to make sure that we do not only create additional jobs here, but that we can provide an outlet for energy around the world so that they aren't reliant on nations like Russia for their energy supplies. So I remain concerned with testimony from the Secretary of Energy, who said that there's a new G7 process involved that could possibly delay it even further, because they will determine in part the public interest statements or determinations through that new G7 process. So I think this is a much needed step in the right direction as we bring energy security to the world through American job creation. With that,
Would the gentleman yield for his last minute? And I just want to reiterate, a lot of people, the country of Lithuania, which I've been focused on for many years, is building a terminal to receive LNG now. The ship is moving across the oceans, being tested so it can land at the port of Klaipėda. The pipelines are already being built. So for people to say that this is not important to our friends in the newly free Eastern European bloc is just not accurate. They're begging for this. They're begging for these signals. They're making the capital investments. This is really a blow for freedom for these people. Energy security. I applaud the bill. I would just reiterate for our NATO allies, and hopefully soon to be additional NATO allies, that this is a big, big deal. And I want to thank my colleague from Colorado. I yield back.
Yield back to the chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired, so we're prepared to accept the amendment. For what purpose is the gentleman from California? Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank Mr. Gardner for accepting this amendment. I think that's a very constructive move on the part of the author of the overall bill. But I do want to underscore what Mr. Rush said. There are other concerns that we have, and I know that there will be amendments brought up in the full committee to deal with matters such as whether we're going to be making problems for our own economy by going as broadly as the Gardner bill would have us do. We want to ensure that American consumers and manufacturers are not harmed by unlimited LNG exports. But I do want to correct the record. Secretary Moniz did not say that DOE is waiting for action by the G7 partners and is therefore going slowly in agreeing to the applications for export of LNG. In fact, what he said explicitly, that this was not the case. And he made that statement around 5 times. He explained that DOE is doing just what we would expect them to do, talk with our allies about policies that affect our international relationships and our energy security. So the claim that anything is being held up by the G7 conversations is not accurate. It's a mischaracterization.
Will the gentleman yield?
Of the Secretary's view. Yes, certainly.
When I asked the Secretary if the public determination decision would be made in part on the G7 process, it was very clear that he said that it would. So that was what the Secretary testified before this committee.
I think that what the Secretary, reclaiming my own time, said that it is a factor, but it is not determining the actions of the DOE, and they're not holding up any of those applications. The DOE does have a process for approving LNG exports. Many of us think that that process is adequate, and we have concerns about opening up the LNG exports as fully as this bill would do. We will have amendments at the full committee, and if the gentleman...
Will the gentleman yield?
If I could complete my statement, if the gentleman author of the bill wishes to discuss some of those amendments with us before we get to full committee, we'd be happy to do that and explore it further.
Will the gentleman yield? Down here, Henry.
Oh, okay, yes.
In order to save the committee time. I just want to say I appreciate that Mr. Rush's amendment has been accepted. I'd say to my friend from Colorado who said not voting for this bill would be like hanging up on a 911 call. Actually, the reality is we'd be putting whoever made that 911 call on hold for about 2 years, but we wouldn't be hanging up on the phone. The fact of the matter is 8 permits have been approved already. The very first one that's going to come online apparently has contracts to send that LNG to Southeast Asia. I'm not sure that this committee can tell any company that gets a permit approved where they have to take their LNG. So I would hope some of it gets to our allies in Europe, but the fact of the matter is 8 are processed. DOE seems to be processing permit applications every other month. And while, you know, I have no problem with exporting LNG, this bill isn't going to speed up the process any more than it's already taking place. And it's not going to guarantee that the LNG gets to the countries that we want it to get to. And as Mr. Waxman said, we do have some concerns from American manufacturers and chemical companies who are deeply concerned that DOE take a thoughtful approach to LNG exports so as not to disadvantage American manufacturing, which is starting to come back to this country from other countries because of the advantage we have in energy, and we don't want to lose that advantage. So I think these are legitimate concerns, and we'll have more to offer at full committee, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Well, I'm happy to have yielded to you, and as I understand your comments, you're expressing the point of view that there's not a division as to whether we want to help the Ukraine and our European allies, but we don't need to open the door so widely as this bill would do to allow exports of LNG all over the world and primarily to Asia in the characterization that we're helping the Ukraine. In fact, we're helping the LNG exports, whether there had been a problem in the Ukraine or not. I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I certainly will support the Russia amendment, but I'm not prepared to vote for the bill in final passage in its present form, and I wanted to put that on the record. Yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, 5 minutes.
Strike the last word. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly support the bill and think it's a great bill that will help the United States and our allies. That being said, I have some concerns about the amendment, and I want to make sure, and maybe either between now and the time we get to full committee, either Congressman Rush or staff can answer my concerns. I was in a meeting this morning that I was fortunate to be at, and the Romanians raised the question of how do we get the gas to the Republic of Moldova, and so I want to make sure that on line 8, the word destinations would allow somebody the flexibility to say it's our intent that we're going to get it to this point, but it might have to go through Greece and Romania to get there, because right now some of that infrastructure is not built. I just want to make sure we're not overly restrictive, because some of our friends that we want to get this natural gas don't have the port to put it in now, or they're landlocked and they need somebody else's port to get it to. So the end destination might be Ukraine, but it might have to pass through a couple of countries to get there. So if we could just take a look at that and make sure that my fears are allayed before we get to the full committee, I certainly will support the amendment with that in mind and support the bill. And I would the gentleman yield? Gentleman, Mr. Scalise from Louisiana.
Thank Mr. Griffith for yielding and for the points that he brings up, because we were both in that same meeting. A number of countries that are friends of the United States have a real interest in the United States exporting liquefied natural gas. And one thing they did bring up, and the Cheniere facility is the only facility that's currently moving forward and actually getting ready to be in a position to export. They have already had an impact on the world markets. And if you look at global energy markets, just the fact that that facility is being built and starting to engage in contracts with other countries has had a positive impact on the world market and helped the United States' geopolitical position to assist our countries, to our neighboring countries, our friendly countries around the world who have an interest in having independence from Russia. And you're already seeing Russia react to this as well. And we need to continue moving down that road. And this process that exists is very cumbersome, doesn't make a lot of sense. And this bill removes a lot of those uncertainties. That 911 call that my colleague from Colorado, who's bringing this bill forward, talked about is a real benefit that not only America gets, tremendous benefit to America from this legislation, but also tremendous benefit to our allies in the world. And just the movement of Cheniere is already having a positive impact on world energy markets. It's good for America's energy security, and it's also good for America's geopolitical position to be in a better position to help our friends so that they don't have to be dependent on nations that they don't like or don't like them. So that'll yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Thank you. And I think just to talk about some of the testimony before this committee, Ambassador Carlos Pascual, the State Department Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs, has stated that expediting U.S. LNG export applications, and I quote, sends a clear signal that the global gas market is changing, that there is the prospect of much greater supply coming from other parts of the world. Hungary's Ambassador at Large for Energy Security, Dr. Anita Orban, who testified before the committee, has stated that, quote, it is simply not true that lifting the natural gas export ban today would not have an immediate effect in Europe. It would immediately change the business calculus of infrastructure investments and send an extremely important message of strategic reassurance to the region, which currently feels more threatened than at any time since the Cold War. I thank the gentleman. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Is there further discussion on the Rush amendment? If not, even though it's been accepted, I'm going to ask for vocal voice, so vote. So all those in favor of the Rush amendment shall signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the question would now occur on forwarding H.R. 6 to the full committee as amended. All those in favor of H.R. 6 say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes certainly appear to have it. Okay, roll call vote's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Scalise. Aye. Mr. Scalise votes aye. Mr. Hall. Aye. Mr. Hall votes aye. Mr. Shimkus. Aye. Mr. Shimkus votes aye. Mr. Pitts. Mr. Pitts votes aye. Mr. Terry. Aye. Mr. Terry votes aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Latta. Aye. Mr. Latta votes aye. Mr. Cassidy. Aye. Mr. Cassidy votes aye. Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson votes aye. Mr. McKinley. Mr. McKinley votes aye. Mr. Gardner. Mr. Gardner votes aye. Mr. Pompeo. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Kinzinger votes aye. Mr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith votes aye. Mr. Barton. Mr. Barton votes aye. Mr. Upton. Mr. Upton votes aye. Mr. Rush. Mr. Rush.
Bobby.
Aye.
Mr. Rush votes aye. Mr. McNerney. Mr. Rush votes no. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes no. Mr. Tonko. Mr. Tonko votes no. Mr. Yarmouth. Mr. Engel. Mr. Green. Mr. Green votes no. Mrs. Capps. Ms. Capps votes no. Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle votes no. Mr. Barrow. Mr. Barrow votes no. Ms. Matsui. Ms. Matsui votes no. Ms. Christensen. Ms. Christensen votes no. Ms. Castor. Ms. Castor votes no. Mr. Waxman. Mr. Waxman votes no. Chairman Whitfield.
Aye.
Chairman Whitfield votes aye.
Are all votes recorded? Does anyone seek recognition to vote? Appears that everyone has voted. Will the clerk report the result?
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 15 ayes and 11 nays.
15 ayes, 11 nays. So the bill as amendment is agreed to. And without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved by the subcommittee today. So ordered, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.